We're recording.
How you doing, everybody? This is Dennis Michelson. Welcome to the science of fantasy football. Why the science of fantasy football? Well, you get a meteorologist and a biologist together. They're going to use the scientific method to forecast fantasy football. And what exactly does that mean? It just means they're going to let the data guide them to an answer without any dishonest use of statistics. And joining me as he does each and every week, he is the fantasy professor, a real professor. It's John Bush. And John, we're quickly moving through all the different stages of the usual fantasy football seasons. Do you have any idea what season we're in now?
It's either rabbit season or duck season.
That's always a good answer.
Yeah.
We're in monkey see, monkey do season right now.
Okay.
When you go on to fantasy football Twitter,
Yeah.
you cannot spend 5 minutes there without seeing somebody posting the exact same thing to start off their discussion. In other words, it's the best or worst picks by round, by position. It's these are the guys that are going to be making you serious money. They're using the exact same phrases as everybody else. And if you want to get anywhere in fantasy football or in life, be original. Come up with an idea. Don't just spew out the same stuff that you see 5 or 6 of the big guys in fantasy football or big ladies in fantasy football posting and think that you're going to get the same amount of traction. Be an original. Don't be a copy. We've got way too many copies out there.
I actually, and I kind of hesitate to go here, but I actually, okay, I'm trying to think of this. Okay, this is okay. Rename. Okay, real quick. We'll put Grok today. So I've got a conversation, Dennis, that applies to this. It's just, where did I was asking about our website, and let's see, variables, gaps, rarely covered. See, I hadn't thought about that, but you made me think about that. It is, and I don't remember now, but I will say I asked the question, does our website add to the psychological biases of that the legacy media throws out? And what you described is the hype bias or recency bias. Oh, I just read about that. And if the worst or the best, and that there's no evidence to that, there's no depth, it's just their cherry-picked opinion of why. And Dennis, the good news, I asked, compare our website to the legacy media's. Do we promote those biases? It said Grok said we're much less. So I felt good about that, Dennis. So and so then I asked the question, I asked what concepts do you and I need to work on, and I hadn't shared this with you, but Grok gave us an opinion, and remember, Grok's trying to make me happy, so it mentions me first at the website, led by Dr. John Bush, often with my co-host Dennis here. And so, Dennis, I didn't tell it to do that. Remember, Grok wants to slick me up and pat me on the back. So I don't see it that way. We're a perfect synergy. We're the Wonder Twins activate. We hit and we are more than just we're more than just the sum. We're a greater thing. It's like a Power Ranger. We're something else, when we get together. Assuming we're either in jail or we're hitting some heights in fantasy football analysis. And we never quite know. And you should come to the expo to see what we're going to be. They'll either be escorting us out, Dennis, Bob Lung, in some consistency handcuffs. Bob Lung will be hitting us like one of those pig sticks, making us go straight, straighten us up a little bit, Dennis, and that's fine. We love Bob Lung, but he's a taskmaster. So, if we get too far off the consistency reservation here, he'll come in and make us sweet. So come to the expo, come find us with our data poster and see if we're being sour or sweet, and you can decide. But anyway, our site, it says through, this is so Grok, probability driven analysis, consistency indexes, ADP modeling, and this is Grok loving me, professor backed insights. The site functions like a lab with seasonal tools, analyst indexes, and extensive podcast content. Wow, I should just copy that, Dennis, and slap it on there. And it talks about things we do, and then it actually things, Dennis, that we haven't done yet. And some of that I'm not going to read because it's like, secret stuff that I'll do later. I did talk about one, simulations, Dennis, and modeling, Monte Carlo, simulate. We talked about that in the clubhouse before the podcast, and I agree, but I'm not a world's expert in that, so I have to tread lightly. But there's some other secret stuff, Dennis. In fact, let me share this with you by the chat. And if you're curious what Grok thinks we should do on the site, but it loves our ADP patterns, our pre-mortem decision, and our consistency performance indexes. It loves that. So we have a collaboration lab vibe, Dennis, and a podcast backbone. How about that? Do you love that or what? Is Grok slicking us up or not?
Grok's being real nice.
It
That's
is,
very
yeah.
good.
Anyway, okay. I just wanted to confound you with that a little bit, make you laugh. And
I'm glad we're following part of my own advice by
Oh,
being original, because
yeah.
there's just too many copies out there, and there's the ones that drive me crazy are the
Yeah.
ones where they'll post, here are my top 15 quarterbacks, and they'll leave off like Josh Allen. Like, that they're just doing that to annoy people. They're not giving you anything real that you can utilize. And the pushback that I got when I actually made a comment about the lack of originality about a week ago.
Oh, Dennis.
Is I had somebody ask me the obvious question: what's missing? What do you think is missing? And that took me all of like 0 seconds to come up with, because it's strategy. it's advice on strategy. And I see some of that stuff. And one of my favorites is showing what a draft looks like if you start at a certain draft position. And I really think that is useful information. But too often they'll give you the one player to select at each round. So you're starting pick 10 and they give you one guy. Well, what if that guy's gone? What do you do then? Like, I really think when you give strategy articles like that based on draft position, you should give a pod of 3 or 4 guys that are likely to be there. Because if I'm drafting 9th this year, I have a shot at getting Amon-Ra St. Brown, but not a sure bet that he's going to be there, because he's going about 7th or 8th in most drafts. Yes, he could fall to 9. If he falls to 9, he's an automatic pick. But if I'm giving strategy advice on any particular point in the draft, starting out first round, I'm going to give a pod of 3 or 4 players to look at, because that's the realistic way of how you have to draft. And same with the second round. Like, now it becomes even more glaring. If I'm drafting in the beginning of the second round, there are some guys that could fall from the first round. You know, if Justin Jefferson's there, he's a likely pick. If we're playing in tight end premium, if Trey McBride falls to me at pick 13 or 14, I'm not even hesitating. That's huge value. Same with Brock Bowers, but they'll probably be gone in the first round in FFPC drafts that are tight end premium. But give strategy advice that makes sense. And I think those articles are missing, because we see so many, zero RB or hero RB. Okay, that works if everybody else is not drafting that way. But I just see too much of the same old out there on fantasy football Twitter. Be original for a change. That's what's going to really draw attention to you. And I can understand the same old guys. You know, there's a guy whose job at a particular website is to give you a top 25 list. That's what he's assigned to do. That's the content you're going to see from him. But if you're an aspiring newcomer who wants to get noticed, be original. Give some strategy advice instead of the same thing you see from 20 different sites. It just doesn't make any sense to me. And that's kind of my gripe of the week, is the lack of originality right now on fantasy football Twitter.
I'll comment. If I was a newcomer, Dennis, from kind of a science perspective, I would want to have assessed what I'm good at.
Yes.
And through my fantasy diary, and I think I would start with my strengths and try to write around that. Whatever that is, if I'm great at auctions or superflex, or if I had, if I wasn't paid to do something, right? If they said, just generate some stuff, it would be to your advantage to play to your strengths. And then as time happens, you will develop other strengths. And remember, we use the scientific process and we test ideas, hypotheses. We actually use stats and we follow the patterns that we see, and we hope that they're statistically favorable. If they're not and they don't work, then I'm not going to tell you about them. That would be a waste of time. So I would, and if you're saying I'm so young, I don't have strengths, Personally, I would wait for a season or two, Dennis. If you want to become a content person, I think I'd spend a couple years. And of course, nobody's going to do that, but I would do that finding what your strengths are. I mean, you must have been led into fantasy some way. You probably played in a league or two. Maybe you won or you did well. Why did you do well? They say beginner's luck. A lot of that is kind of, there's two ways to look at that, Dennis. I don't know if we probably hadn't discussed that, but beginner's luck can be good or bad, and it can be bad if the luck is because you just randomly picked the first gray horse and it paid 20 to 1
Yes.
versus you kind of have a pattern nature, you're good at math, you like some data, and you go to, hey, somebody said we're going to the track, and you just remember from college and your stats, and you look at some data and you make a halfway educated, maybe lucky, but there's something statistical, some pattern, something drove you there and you win. If you're that kind of person, then that probably inspires you then to go, man, these stats can, my stats professor never showed me I can, win a hot dog and a beer here. Let me learn some more. Versus, oh, my stats professor said bet the gray horse. No, they didn't. And so remember, beginner's luck can be a curse or actually a pattern, a journey for you to get much better. So if I was starting, I would try to figure out, why did I win that league? Did I, pick up some 2-month-old magazine the night before and drink, just a 6-pack because I was, broke because I drank a case last weekend and I blew all my money? Or, what's going on here? So hopefully you've got a mathematical, statistical, data analysis, something attracted you to that versus, you're a Shakespeare major and, it's going to be hard to find fantasy football. There may be some allegories there, but I don't know. Anyway, Dennis, that would be my advice for youngins. I call anybody under 30 these days. I mean, I hope I get old, die before I get old concept. But I hit my 30s long time ago, and now I'm moving on.
And here's the key is sometimes you might have a theory or something you do in fantasy football, just like there was something my dad always did at the track. It's Sportsman's Park harness track. If the number 5 had not won by the 6th race, and there were usually 10 races in a night, my dad would he'd include the 5 in his exactas and trifectas, and he'd probably bet the 5 horse straight up. And it was like, oh, lucky 5. Well, when I looked at the data at Sportsman's Park, when they were a 5/8 mile track, the number 5 post position won at a higher percentage of races than any other position on the track. And in harness racing, you would think the number 1 position would. But then I watched a few races after he mentioned, oh, I'm betting the 5. Why? Oh, they haven't won yet. 6 races, hasn't won. I looked at the stats, and at that meet, and there were good, 150 races in already for the year, winning almost 20% of the races. That means 2 a night are cashing, 2 a night or more are cashing, most nights in order to get close to that 20%. And he figured if it hadn't won in the first 6, it was due. Well, it was, because if you put a good horse at that 5 position, especially if he was a closer, because I started watching the races more intently on what was happening, and the 5 hole was getting live cover more often. The 5 and the 6 were getting live cover almost every race. And I was like, aha, there's a reason for this happening. But that's the difference between gut feeling and looking at the stats. But the whole idea of a good strategy in fantasy football, and this is going to sound really weird, the best strategies in fantasy football still reward you if you're wrong about a player. And it sounds really stupid to say that, right? But look at the better than zero concept and why it works. Over the years, had a pretty good read on wide receivers, had a pretty good read on quarterbacks and tight ends. Picked them up at the right places in the draft. Running backs were always my weakness. So how do you counteract your weakness? Well, what do we do in better than zero? We draft a lot of running backs. So sometimes your strategy can help with your weaknesses in fantasy football. But in order to take advantage of that, you really have to understand the ADP. And one of the things that you've taught me over the years, Professor, is how to read those trends in ADP. And that always pays off.
Yeah, I ran this through Grok. I gathered the FFP, the PC ADP, and I have a methodology I will produce for our site, but I was lazy this day and I picked up that I let Grok pick up what I knew were usually there. And we found 2 positional runs, or Grok did, using the latest, I guess, Friday's FFPC ADP. 2 positional runs, 8 RBs in a row, Dennis, pick 13 to 20.
Yep.
And then picks 38 to 48, 8 wide receivers in a row.
Wow.
And notice Grok in the previous conversation said that is a classic mid-4 round WR historically. So I asked the question based on that statement. So I guess that's happened before. I don't know about the running backs being that strong, so I was a little tricked by that. But anyway, it confirms that yes, they are. The old perceived scarcity value tiers, position specific diamond, and it gives you a lot of reasons here, and why these things happen. Round 2 clustering, Grok speculates as to why that's happened in the past and why the wide receivers were happening. I mean, so he gives some background, and I'm interested in that because I'm curious what fuels that. And, I wonder, and I haven't checked in May, Dennis, or, even earlier. Has this just hit, or has it kind of always been brewing in, previous months? I haven't checked that. I just, I've been doing lots of other stuff here. And so how do we, strategy-wise, traditionally, and Grok parrots what's out there, use tiers. The strongest historical advice is to draft by tiers rather than chasing the runs or counting positions. and you supposedly prepare by mocks and ADP. And, the context of what you're building and what you draft in round one. Are you going zero or hero RB, light or heavy WRs? And, it says don't overreact and get crazy. And I think that means don't draft an RB in a run if you're already happy with your RB, for instance. Like, say you've gotten Bijan or people like Gibbs. If you're happy with those, then maybe you have some flexibility. So I started thinking a little bit, and I'm going to let Dennis hit us with his pattern. But two things. First, I brought this up before, is just relying on tiers or just somebody's cheat sheet. Their argument is, well, just draft the highest rated player on my sheet. I've never done that. Dennis and I have sheets that we use, but I don't remember, unless we're in a timed draft like 15-second, if we have a minute or two, we're going to have some time to think about it. And remember, we already know this is coming. I know I've got to deal with these mountains through it, under it, over it, around it. Okay. To me, tiers and just randomly pick the next player up, just that sounds weak. I understand that might be for people that are panicked, but I want to be better than that. And so I brought this up so Dennis and I could maybe tease out something. But I just, and again, maybe it's just my Eeyore strategy that I don't want to be everybody. I want to be the same donkey that most people are. I want to be a albino donkey or a donkey with a unicorn horn. I want to be something a little different. And I just wasn't satisfied with the historical aspects. So I'm going to stop and let Dennis pontificate a little bit, then we'll see where we go. But that's the traditional strategy. We know it's coming, Dennis. How do we deal with it?
One of the things that I try to do in each round is I do pay attention to the runs, but I don't let the runs really dictate the direction I'm going automatically. And here's how I handle it. So, for instance, I'm in a current draft now. We're through the first 5 rounds, so I'm waiting for my 6th pick. I was drafting number 4 in the first round. Now, this is going to sound really weird, but when I'm picking 4th, I rank my top 6 players. I know I'm going to get one of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I know I'm actually going to get a choice between 3 of them.
Yes.
But by doing it that way, and I'm not even thinking it at pick 4, I'm not thinking tight end. Too early for a tight end, in my opinion. There's just too much raw meat of super elite players at
and it's
wide
a tight
receiver.
end premium, Dennis.
Even though it's tight end premium.
And the first tight end is going about pick 7.
Yes. And I think that's accurate. I think that's if anything,
I think
that
Bowers
might be
is going pick 7 in
Bowers
FFPC.
is Bowers is number 1, and he's been going 7th, 8th ish is right around
Not
where
too
he's
much
going.
deeper than 8.
No, he's not falling past 10 in any draft that I've seen so far. In fact, the draft I'm speaking of, he dropped to number 10.
Wow,
But that's the
nice.
lowest. That's the lowest I've seen him drop. I've seen him go as early as 6.
Yes.
And now as late as 10. But that's how I look at the situation. Is I look, what's the earliest a guy goes? What's the latest he goes as far as a tight end? And in this case, I'm not so sure. Now, if I looked at the data and I said, oh, I don't like any of the running backs, and I'm not crazy about maybe only 2 of the wide receivers. If that's the case, then a tight end would be in play. But this year, when I looked at, okay, first pick of the draft, if I had the absolute first pick of the draft, who are the 6 guys that I would consider drafting? And of course, Bijan and Gibbs at running back. But those are the only 2 running backs that I put in that same tier together. Wide receiver, it's easy for me this year. It's in no particular order. It's Chase, Nakua, JSN, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. Those are my 4 guys that are more bulletproof than anybody else. The 5th wide receiver, in my opinion, is a big drop-off. It might be Justin Jefferson. It might be A.J. Brown. But those 4 are the key. So I already had my top 6 in that first round. And I decided to go Nakua this time. I think his volume is very attractive. Nakua, JSN, Amon St. Brown. I knew Chase would probably be gone. And I knew Gibbs and Bijan would probably be gone. That was my forecast, is I expected to have Nakua, JSN, Amon-Ra St. Brown as my 3 survivors out of my top 6, and I got Nakua. So I was happy with that. But before my second pick, and you pointed out that starts at pick 13 now. Is that what you said?
Yes.
So this run happened a little later in our draft. It didn't kick in until pick 17.
Wow.
6 running backs went boom, 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 boom. So when it got back to close to me, I got about 4 picks away. I always like to look about 4 picks away, because then I'm not making it. And this is a slow draft. So even if I'm not exact on 4 away when I check in on the draft, but if I see I'm 4 away or less, that's the time that I go and I set my cue. And I just, okay, take everything else out of the equation. Who are the next 6 best players that are coming up in this draft? And this is where it gets tricky, because when you're picking 4th, you got about another 6 picks before you come back again. So it's a pretty close group. So if I put 6 on the board, when it's my turn to pick, I might get 2 of those guys in the 2nd and 3rd round. In this case, my guys, like I'm 4 picks away, okay? And I'm thinking Chase Brown, Ken Walker, Derrick Henry. Those are my 3 running backs that I'm thinking of. Wide receivers, Brown's already gone. Jefferson's already long gone. So my top 3 wide receivers, I'm thinking, boy, I like Olave and Rice. I'm not sure I like anybody after that in that same tier. It's Olave, it's Rice, and then it's a drop-off, in my opinion. So I don't force it to be 3 and 3, or I don't force it to be 6. I'm like, those are the 5 that I want. And Chase Brown went right before my pick. A-Shane had already been gone before I set my list. And if A-Shane had dropped all the way to pick 2-9, 21st pick in the draft, then he's more attractive. But he was gone. I was happy that he's gone, because I don't really like the Dolphins offense this year. But when I got to my pick, Ken Walker was the only running back left. Chase Brown was taken right before, and actually Derrick Henry was still available. So I had Derrick Henry, Ken Walker, Rice, and Olave as my four guys that I thought fit at that draft pick. Now, there's other players I like, obviously. You're not going to leave a draft with three players. But those were the guys that I had set in that next tier of what ended up being five. And when I end up with that, that's when I consider, okay, if all of those guys are gone, will I consider a quarterback or a tight end at this spot? That's kind of how I strategize every draft. When it came to my pick, I had two running backs and two wide receivers left. So I had a good mix. I had a shot at one of those guys falling back to me. And I said, Henry could fall to the third round to my next pick. Rashee Rice could, or Olave could fall. So I had two wide receivers and one running back that I thought could fall to me. That's it. That's pretty lean when it comes out. I'm going to have to refill my arrow quiver of picks potentially before my next pick. Ended up that Olave went at the turn at 212. Henry went one pick before me, and I was left with only Rashee Rice and his jail time and his parole. One parole violation away from about 10 years in the clink, folks. But I have him priced to be there. Now, I really had second thoughts because I'm like, man, do I want two Chiefs? Do I want Walker and then Rice? And the decision was, yep, I'm going to be okay with that. But that's how I strategized. I didn't let the run dictate that I went Walker first, because there was a run of four running backs before my pick. Now, incidentally, I started a run of wide receivers in the third round. My pick of Rice, it then went Pickens, Collins, one running back, Breece Hall in there, and then Igbuka and Smith. So 5 of the next 6 picks were wide receivers. But one of the other ways that I use this data is to understand what's more likely to come back to me in certain circumstances. If I'm looking at your chart and you break down, here's where the 12th, here's where the 18th running back and wide receiver going off the list.
Yeah.
I have a pretty good feeling. I can look at that historic data or even that data for the current year, and I can compare that to what's happening in my draft. And if I see that 21 running backs have gone, but only 12 wide receivers, I'm not likely to take the 22nd running back. My data will tell me prioritize wide receiver, because I'd rather have the 13th best player at a position than the 26th best player at a position. I think your odds are better of having an elite guy, and that would be the same case if I went wide receiver to open a draft, and wide receiver was the best player available in that third round. I'd go back to another wide receiver. I don't like to let position need dictate. I let the scarcity of the top guys. If only 11 wide receivers are gone and I can get the 12th one, I think that's going to be better for my team, where we start 2 wide receivers, 2 running backs, and 2 flex.
Right.
I'd rather have 3 spots filled with top 12 guys.
Right.
If ADP ends up being correct.
Right. So I try to keep track of these patterns, and this is a non-tight end premium. I'm just running just to kind of see what's going on. So they got Bowers in round 2. That's not right for what we're dealing with. Uh, Josh Allen maybe in round 3. In other words, keeping track allows me to figure out where things are going, and it kind of tells me the landscape. So, how I deal with that problem, Dennis, is I have the landscape pattern kind of ahead of me. I kind of know the map around the mountain. Okay. And I don't mean to go around the mountain, I mean around that area. So in the next, say, 6 picks, I kind of know where quarterbacks, tight ends, running backs, wide receivers, what's going to be gone in the, say, first third of the draft. I kind of use that. That's in the better than zero. The idea is you're really trying to build this anchoring concept on RBs and WRs, and maybe letting, depending if quarterbacks or tight ends are slipping, maybe go there. But late quarterback or streaming tight ends are something that I tend to do. Just it's worked for me. I've made it work, and in the past, I'm good at the waiver wire. With Dennis's help, we raid the waiver wire tree. I feel like most weeks, Dennis, we're doing well. It's rare that we miss something. The worst thing that happens, folks, for us in season is we didn't pick up the hot pick that everybody. So, but I've got a fab budget, and I've got a chance to get in on that sweepstakes. I'd rather get it cheap for $1, but if I've waited too late, I still have a shot at it. So then that makes me decide, is this really what I want? Because last year, I remember people were burning significant amounts. People like Haskins, and I picked up
Oh,
Vidal. You
yeah.
too.
Yep.
In other words, people are going crazy, and I know those waiver wire, 50% of your bid. It just gets crazy. And if I'm writing an article, it's easy for me to claim. It's like, yeah, you take 50% of your life savings to buy this oil well over here. Sure, it's easy to say, you know, is it is it a gushing oil well, or is it just a squirter oil well, Dennis? It makes a big difference here on your investment. Does the horse have 4 legs, or is it got a wounded paw? Which one you gonna bet on? So just remember, it's easy for me to have a tip sheet and tell you anything I want, because tomorrow I'm gonna circle things, and you'll think I must have made 1 million on my tip sheet. I know how those work, and that's what happens into the season. I told y'all about that sleeper. See, Hall of Fame. I told you this was the guy. You're gonna see a lot of that crowing too. And remember crow, Dennis? And if you think about that, and you have crows in your area, Dennis, they crow all the damn time. In fact,
Oh,
that's why
yeah.
they call them crows, because they're always crowing. So to me, Twitter's like that. Well, this guy's crowing. Well, that means next week he's going to be crowing too, and the week after. So that's just, it's of no use. If somebody like Bob Lung starts saying something, I'm going to listen a lot more, because he usually doesn't, shoot blanks. If he's saying something, it's real. And,
Yes.
I think he lets his fantasy consistency guide, which everybody should buy, because we hadn't released our secret stuff. I mean, that's the best you can get. I'd buy that and become one with it and see how good you are at it. I think it would put money in your pocket this year. So I think it's $15 at Amazon. Bob Lung consistency. Buy it today, tomorrow. Don't buy it for your league mates. Or here's the trick. You really want it? Buy last year's, switch the covers, and sell it to your worst enemy in your dynasty.
Ooh.
And you know what you got is the real one. But hey, man, look at this. Merry Christmas. Here you go. Have fun at the 2024 draft guide. And, especially if you buy them some of that Old Crow whiskey, down at the bottom of the label, the 99-cent whiskey bottle, that's what you buy. It's right next to whiskey, the generic whiskey. It's the Old Crow right there. Old Granddad, they're right in a row. You buy them a few of those before the draft, get them all liquored up. Here's your draft guide right here. So Dennis, crows crow. They crow every week. That's why they're crows. And that's what's going to happen. So I like the landscape. And then with another reason it just kind of hit me, I like tight end premium, is because that adds complexity to the second round.
Yes.
Right? It adds complexity. And that means people are drafting. There's going to be 2 in your league that are drafting the 2 tight ends. So that means if they're going to go crazy, they're going to be in that RB run because they got a tight end. And think of the 4 wide receivers in the first round. They're going to go. So there you go. That's 6, Dennis. I guarantee you there's no way less than 6 RBs are going in round 2, because I just know people are scared. In other words, there's no way somebody's going to go tight end. There's no way somebody's going to go tight end quarterback round 1 and 2. There's no way, that's going to happen. So there are a few that will go WR. Most people are, because all the crows are crowing, the hero RB, they're going to go RB. So I think the sweepstakes is coming. So I like to decide based on what I picked up. If somebody lets Bowers fall to the 10th, yeah, I'm probably picking him, and I'm probably I'm probably in that sweepstakes. But the good news, if I'm on the turn, that means I'm early in the sweepstakes. Where I usually would pass on that run, if I've got, say, Bijan in round 1, Dennis, I'm probably at the end of that second round RB, and I'm like, yeah, I think I can find me an RB2 in the few, rounds coming up. I'm going to go somewhere else, probably a WR, probably. Not, Olave, or while you're all going in the round 2, I'm picking up some good scraps there. So a lot of times it depends on my draft position, how I deal with that run. But I think 6 for sure going, but in the ADP it's 8. But that's how I do it, is I kind of dictate my round 1 a little bit, is kind of what I do. But I've gone RB. I mean, if for whatever reason something funky happens, and I'm close to the turn and there's some RBs that have dropped that I like, or okay, I might go RB, but most likely if it's, 8, 9, 10, I'm considering a tight end or probably a wide receiver, a Monse Brown or somebody. And then since I'm on the turn, I'm going to get in the run early, Dennis, and probably go in an RB just generically right now. So that's kind of how I do it. I would never take a tip sheet and say, oh, just pick my highest rated guy. That's not thinking, Dennis, because I'm thinking about round 3, 4. Where am I picking my tight end? Where am I picking my quarterback if I'm going to do late? In other words, I've got to have some landmarks. When did those things play out? If you wake up around 12 and you don't have a tight end or a quarterback, boy, you're probably going to be real strong, but you're going to be real weak as well, unless you get lucky, unless your diary says you're good at that strategy. A lot of times by the 6th round, people have picked a quarterback. Sometimes I've waited as long as 8 or 9 to pick a tight end, and a lot of times I might pick two back to back. Or if I pick tight end in mid rounds, I may pick two quarterbacks back to back. Dennis kind of taught me that as well. So again, what am I doing round one? Okay, depends on kind of my round two. And then the landscape itself. Am I going to go streaming quarterback? In other words, who are my streamers? What is their other kinds of like strength of schedule, these kind of things. So I'm looking at the big data. I've got our secret cheat sheet. It tells me in general what we're thinking about later in the draft. So I'm trying to plan ahead, not trying to react. I'm not trying to react, Dennis. I'm trying to forge ahead. And that's how I do it. And I can't describe it other than that. And it's not mechanical. That sounds like a tip sheet, and I just don't do it that way. I deliberately have not made definite plans. I kind of favor, but I'm not just in blood. Sign me up for whoever. There is no player in this draft that I'm signing in blood for. It just depends on where I'm at, what's on the board, what's the value, what has gone on before, what are people doing now, kind of thing. So it's very adaptive that way.
Yeah, and that's the best way to be, is to be adaptive. What I like to do is I like to set targets for the different tight ends and quarterbacks that I might consider. This year, I really like Drake May a lot. Our data likes him. I like the way he closed out last year. And I think he's one of the safer picks to be top 3 at quarterback this year. But that doesn't mean I'm going to take him as soon as 2 quarterbacks are off the board. I have a 6th round grade on Drake May based on what it's going to be gone at running back and wide receiver and tight end. And 6th round is where I'm going to go shopping. Now, that doesn't mean that I wouldn't take him late in the 5th round or even mid to late in the 5th round. It just means come 6th round, I'm going to start thinking about Drake May. And I've got other tight ends and quarterbacks that I have that targeted data. We know Bowers and McBride are going to be gone. Yep. End of the 1st, early 2nd at the very latest. I wouldn't let them fall that far. And the 3rd tight end, yeah, it makes sense that Colston Loveland might be the 3rd best tight end this year. But I'm not so sure. There's more of a downside to Loveland based on the fact that there's a lot of mouths to feed in Chicago this year. You know, how are you going to get top 15 out of Swift, top 10, top 15 out of both Odunze and Burden, and top 3 out of a tight end? To me, that seems pretty tough to do. And yes, I love that Bears offense. I think they're going to need to score a lot of points again this year. But that's a lot of mouths to feed. I'm a lot more comfortable taking either Bowers or McBride in the 1st round because there's fewer mouths to feed. Now, there's more mouths to feed in Arizona than ever before. So that has me worried a little bit about McBride. But that's where you got to make a decision on him. And at different quarterbacks, like Josh Allen's a fabulous quarterback, but I don't want to pay an early 3rd round price to get him. And that's typically been what he is going. He went 3-2 in this draft. And Loveland, by the way, went 2-11 in this draft. I have a third round minimum on Loveland. Then I've got a fifth round minimum on Tucker Kraft. Those are my targets based on where I think they should go in a draft. And then I've got my guys that I like a little bit later. I'll start entertaining Kelsey in about the 7th or 8th rounds. Same with Kittle. I think Kittle's going to be good again this year, and I like him there. But that's how I lay out my draft. It's not necessarily who I think the best guy is going to be at tight end and quarterback. Who's going to be the best value? And if I can get him close to that value, I'm feeling pretty good, because the rest of my running backs and wide receivers will all fall into line. Now, in the better than zero philosophy, I'm taking 9 running backs, right?
Yes.
We have 10 bench spaces. I'm taking 9 running backs in most of my drafts. I've got a lot of error that I can make at the running back position and still have 2 good ones come the end of the year. My goal is to have 2 guys to start every week. Okay, at running back. At wide receiver, I want 3. I want 3 solid wide receivers, because I feel like we got a little better glimpse into who those wide receivers are going to be. So once I get to the 6th round of a draft, by the end of the 6th, I want to have 3 wide receivers. I want to have 2 solid running backs to start. And then the strategizing comes into play. And if I'm uncertain about a guy at running back, and if I can grab his backup, now I've got 2 chances to be right at that position. But that's how I like to use ADP and use the ADP knowledge to my benefit. And in this particular draft, when I was up in the 3rd round, picked 3-4, okay, so 28th pick in the draft. When I was there, I had the choice between the 15th running back, the 2nd quarterback, the 4th tight end, or the 10th wide receiver. That made my decision fairly easy. Also, the fact that I only had 1 player still left on my group of 6 that I would have considered at pick 2-9. But that's how I like to use that data. And then as the draft goes on, I expand that list of players. I'm usually looking at 5 or 6 running backs. I'm looking at 5 or 6 wide receivers. I'm looking at 1 or 2 quarterbacks and tight ends. So I've got my big list to decide between when it comes to the next pick or the next 2 picks. But understanding that ADP and understanding how your particular draft is varying compared to the ADP, I think is very important to understand where that best value is.
There's some deeper aspects. If I'm fishing in the run, I'm not sure I want to share, but I will say that not every one of those RB2, and I call them round 2 types, are the same.
Yes.
I would urge you to do some even if you're not planning on fishing in that run, it is to your benefit. If you're going to do multiple drafts, which ones of these RBs are runner types, which ones are balanced, which ones are receiver types, and there are patterns that can distinguish which way, where you might fish a little bit. So even though it seems like one big pond, I'm going to argue it's 3 little ponds, and you need to make some decisions. And the skew is obviously earlier in this 8 RB round is probably better than the late RB
Yes.
round
Yes.
necessarily, but it's for you to figure that out. And you could even tear it that way. Divide the run into 4 above, 4 below. And, okay, here's my choice. You could even play that mind game a little bit. I would definitely want to know that. And again, understanding, let's call them archetypes of RBs, can give you some insights here uh, to that. And remember, it's a PPR. So RBs in that second round that can catch 4 or 5 catches a week versus those that maybe will catch 1 or 2 might tip the scales a little bit. So, not just taking somebody's cheat sheet and flipping to the next one down, folks. You need to do some background. If you're planting a garden, you better understand the soil pH, how rich it is. You amend the soil, what's the sunlight. I mean, there versus, oh, well, this area is just open and that's where I'm going to go. I'm going to throw the seeds in and hope something sprouts. That's the kind of players you want in your league, right? The ones that are just crowing and they're dropping anything shiny, they're going for. That's the crow. Okay. They're flapping their chops. And, a lot of times you'll see them in the league chats, boy, you're a fool for doing that. Or, man, why did you, and that's fine. Let them flap. In fact, if you have time in a slow draft, you could even chum the waters. You could say, after let's say there's an RB run and for whatever reason, pick 14, you picked and you got an RB. Say, well, I know the run's starting, folks. I'm glad I got mine. I don't go crazy out there. And that's going to make them think. It's like, man, and the ones that are halfway asleep, that's going to wake them up and maybe they'll start. So that the third pick, the third round, Dennis, maybe there's some secret RBs or WRs, something that maybe should have fallen in round 2 or now in round 3 because everybody went crazy on the run. That's good. So get greedy and give the crows something to hit and sparkles and make them all happy. Throw some glitter at them, see what happens. And but I'm giving you a little hint. I probably should write an article, but I'm old and tired. But I would say you better know those RBs. And we didn't talk a lot about the WRs and that second and in 38 through whatever it was, 40 something. Again, what kind of are these boom bust? Are they slot receivers? Are they balanced perimeter types? What are their flavors? And I believe that can give you some insights. And in your diary, write down, maybe define your flavor. Are you good at spotting those boom bust guys? By the way, round 4, boy, I'd hate to be relying on a boom bust. You get 5 great weeks and 8 suck weeks. That's not consistency that we like. You win 5, but you lose 8 weeks in a WR2. That's not good. I want to win at least 7 or 8 weeks, Dennis. And so that you just need to know what you know and look at patterns, find out what these runs are, who is in the run, what are these lists of suspects. It's not just a usual suspect, everybody's the same. It's not. Now's the time beforehand to do some, and don't look at Twitter 10 minutes before you start your research because it's going to bias you. Okay, don't do that. So anyway, find out the flavors, where these runs are, the flavors, but you've got basic questions. Do I want a late or an early quarterback? Am I going to take a streaming tight end or an elite tight? You need to make some decisions and own them and write them down And I know late quarterback has worked for me. Streaming tight ends have worked for me. So I feel pretty good about those possibilities. Not that I'm going to ignore a value. If it's the eighth round and Drake May's still there, that's very intriguing, Dennis. You know, if something just really is crazy, I'm not going to pass it because, well, I told myself I'm doing whatever. You know, I'm
Yes.
not signing in blood. These are just things to think about and suggestions and kind of a loose pattern, right? If you're traveling and this road is blocked, well, what are you going to sit there till it's unblocked? No, you look around, you find an alternative. So don't get sold in on people's cheat sheets, tout sheets. Don't, just, well, everybody's taking an RB. I better take a WR. Maybe you should, maybe you shouldn't, Dennis. And just depends on who you're picking. So you better know what you're doing, not just, well, I'm going to do opposite. Well, if you get a suck player, is that really what the whole point is? No. It's to take a valuable player that's of value. And consistency is the bottom line for us early in the draft. We're looking for safe, consistent, upside kind of folks. And we're taking some gambles later in the better than zero.
And in this particular draft, I admit that I was taking a gamble by taking Rashee Rice as the 10th wide receiver off the board because there aren't many players who are currently on probation who could go to jail for a long time if they screw up again. But I made the decision that he was the best value at that pick. But that pick also sort of got me thinking, I better have another good wide receiver by the end of round 5. And I ended up coming back and getting Devontae Adams as the 24th wide receiver off the board. And I don't understand why he's being ignored. This is a guy that was a top 10 producer last year. Yeah, he's old. He was old last year. He produced just fine. So sometimes the pick that you make might influence what you're going to do in the next several rounds. I love in that second round to get a guy who's a high PPR guy with because of receptions. If I can get a guy who's a 50 plus reception guy like Chase Brown in the second round, I'm going to make that move every single time. Good player, good offense, limited competition, and has a track record of catching lots of balls out of the backfield. That's my kind of wide running back in the second round. And the two that are available are Achane and Brown this year. Brown's on the much better offense. So I would lean to him. But if he's not available, then you've got to make a decision on which direction you're going to go. And that's the big key is always understand that every card that you play in the draft might change your outlook on that next pick. Obviously, if there's still a premium at a position, I'm taking it even if I'm already strong in that position. But as the draft goes on, as you get past the 5th, 6th, 7th round, then you do have to take not just scarcity of position into play, but you got to look at your lineup. Are you good at late quarterback? I've had a lot of good success lately taking my 2 quarterbacks in the 8th and 9th rounds. Now I got 2 chances. I got 2 guys to depend on. And that's an option that I'm going to be really happy about again this year. And there's some guys that are falling far enough in the draft. Patrick Mahomes is being drafted way too late. I understand the injury concern. I understand the concern about the last 2 years being kind of blah. But he's got the pedigree that I'm not going to let him drop too far. Trevor Lawrence is another guy who's getting drafted way too late. I'd be very happy get Trevor Lawrence and come back with Patrick Mahomes, or take Patrick Mahomes and come back with a Matthew Stafford or a Brock Purdy or a Jared Goff. If you got two, you now got two good chances of picking the right guy and getting higher quarterback performance. If I could take Mahomes and Purdy, Mahomes and Lawrence, any combination of those four quarterbacks that I just mentioned, or five quarterbacks I just mentioned, and I can be right on which one of those two to start every week, I can get quarterback 4 or 5 production out of that combo. At tight end, it's a little tougher to do that. But at tight end, if I can close the gap between the guy that's got Bowers and McBride, then I'm doing okay. But each round of the draft, you have to make that decision on quarterback or tight end. And it's an educated decision because you know what you're giving up. But are you getting more? But this year, I can see a lot more 2 late tight ends, 2 late quarterbacks being on my rosters, because that'll give me the first 6 players that I'm really confident about starting every week. That's my 2 running backs, my 2 wide receivers, my 2 flex. That simplifies my decision making each and every week. And then I got to decide between the best of the 2 quarterbacks, the best of the 2 tight ends on my roster. Again, if we had only a 5-player bench, I might be going more elite at quarterback and only taking 1. I might go more elite at tight end and only take 1. When you're playing in a 10-player bench league, you have the luxury of space for an extra quarterback, an extra tight end. I've even taken 3 quarterbacks in the past, or 3 tight ends on my roster, depending on what is available. But understanding ADP is a big key to success. And Professor, each and every year, your ADP guide that you put out there showing the patterns helps me more than anything else on understanding how to take advantage of ADP.
Yeah, I'll try to get that out after the expo, kind of, give something to look at. But I'm going to be thinking a little bit more about boom and bust this year, a little bit more about flavors of players. I'm going to try to incorporate that. So basically, we're doing some tests with extra secret stuff, and we'll just see how it goes. And if you lay down some jack at the expo on our secret stuff, well, we can be bribed, but so come on, come to the expo and visit us. But we'll still come back. I hope that you've heard some ideas. I would listen again and write some ideas. It's not as simple as, do a tier or do the next on the cheat. I understand that's easy, but then those people, the few that are listening to us, that's not who they are. And so if it sounds like we're just running around, we're not. It's just kind of the way we do stream of consciousness. As a professor, sometimes I'd start talking all of a sudden. Well, think about that. So sometimes I have to bring it in, and so that happens. So I would listen to this. That's why we're recording it. And but flavors and boom bust types and strategies, it's now the time. This is not something you do 5 minutes before your draft. I've been working And Dennis has been working since what, February? Okay, folks, hours a day, on average. So, are you going to beat us? Probably not in our leagues. So just stay out of our leagues. And I'm not going to tell you I'm in there because I use secret names. But, you know, just, you don't want any of this. You need to move on. Okay. You do not want to be the sucker to table. Please do not play in leagues where Dennis and I are fishing. You you might beat us, but we'll have 6 to 8 to 10 wins, and that's fine. As long as we're making money, that's fine with me. You can beat one of my leagues. That's fine.
So head on over to the scienceoffantasyfootball.com. You can check out all of the Professor versus AI articles. Grok getting a workout with the professor. He's treating Grok like one of his old graduate students. Head on over to the sportsaffiliation.com. Check out our sister podcast, The Data Lab. We're going to be talking about historic quarterback ADP data over there. Like and subscribe to their YouTube page. So many great shows.
It's the Data Lab. It's what we produce over there.
Is the Data Lab, and so many great shows. Aces Up and the Thursday night show with Greg Kellogg. The
Carla does good.
Oh my goodness.
Wednesday.
There's so many great shows. So head on over there later and head on back here next week for another edition of the Science of Fantasy Football.
Get to work, folks.